From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, February 11. Chris Dawson's lawyers are seeking leave to appeal to the High Court against his conviction for murdering his wife, Lynette Sims. The former footballer, who was charged after The Australian's podcast The Teacher's Pet, says the criminal courts have got it wrong and he couldn't get a fair trial because police took nearly 4 decades to charge him. Ancient cave paintings on the Nullarbor Plain in South Australia are at serious risk of decay. That's according to scientists and Indigenous owners. Research and conservation have been halted because 2 groups of traditional owners and native title holders can't agree on who should oversee the painstaking work. Those exclusives are live now at theaustralian.com.au. The pressure's on for Anthony Albanese and Ambassador Kevin Rudd to persuade Donald Trump to exempt Australia from sweeping 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium. The Prime Minister says he's got a phone call lined up with the White House, but in the policy whirlwind of Washington DC, will Australia's pleas be heard? That's today's episode. Before we start, there's a bit of Billy Connolly and therefore some swearing in this episode.
We want this and that. We demand a share in that and most of that, some of this and fucking all of that.
This episode of The Front is about Donald Trump, but sometimes the person to best sum up the mood of the moment is Billy Connolly.
And another thing, we want it now. I want it yesterday. I want fucking more tomorrow. And the demands will all be changed then, so fucking stay awake.
The Scottish comedic genius was talking about the women's movement back in the 80s, but he could have been talking about the first 3 weeks of the Trump administration redux.
I'm having an early morning shock every single day, Claire. It's the most remarkable news cycle I can recall in 40 years of journalism. Donald Trump Mark II is not just one announcement a day, it's about 7 different major announcements a day. It's been absolutely spectacular.
That's Cameron Stewart, The Australian's chief international correspondent. And we're talking about Trump's latest big announcement, made aboard Air Force One as he travelled to the Super Bowl in New Orleans, the first sitting president to attend America's most sacred sporting day. Trump was mid-sentence in his leather armchair, chatting to a group of reporters when an announcement came from the cockpit.
Attention on board. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please direct your attention out the right side of the aircraft. Air Force One is currently in international waters, for the first time in history, flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
Wow, yeah. He did that well. That's a good... Make America great again, right? That's what we care about. Okay, here we go.
In the days since we did our last episode about Donald Trump, the president has renamed the Gulf of Mexico. He's announced the United States will own Gaza. He's reintroducing plastic straws, sacking thousands of federal public servants, sanctioning the International Criminal Court, negotiating between Live Golf and the PGA, releasing water from Californian dams to fight wildfires. And this is the bit that sent international markets and the Australian government into DEFCON 1.
We'll also be announcing steel tariffs on Monday.
Tomorrow?
Monday, yeah, tomorrow.
What countries will those go on?
Everybody, steel.
Including Canada, Mexico,
Yeah,
United States?
any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
10%? What's
25%.
25 for aluminum.
25 for both.
Just like that, the president sent markets into meltdown with a new iteration of his ideas on free trade and protectionism. Last year, Australia sent about $1 billion worth of steel and aluminium to the United States.
That would mean Australian jobs would be lost. It would be a real problem for the Australian economy, and it would be a major bilateral issue between the two countries. So we are basically looking at a situation, Claire, where all the things that have been speculated about the Trump administration and Australia, we will find some big answers in the next couple of days as to exactly what Donald Trump thinks of Australia, exactly what he thinks of the friendship, the alliance, and exactly how far he wants to push things.
In his first administration, Trump talked like an old-school protectionist. I'm here for American jobs, and tariffs are a tool to protect American manufacturing from cheap foreign imports. Last week, it looked like Trump was using tariffs as a lever, a tool of political pressure. Colombia wouldn't accept military flights full of deportees, so Trump threatened a giant tariff on all Colombian goods. Trump said Canada wasn't doing enough to stop the flow of drugs like fentanyl over the border, so he slapped them with tariffs. On Air Force One, Trump said any country that imposes tariffs on American goods will get a taste of its own medicine.
I'll be announcing probably Tuesday or Wednesday at a news conference reciprocal tariffs, and very simply, it's if they charge us, we charge them.
Of course, in 2018, Trump tried to put tariffs on a bunch of countries for steel and aluminium, exactly the same concept. He exempted Australia at that point, in part because the US has a trade surplus with Australia. So we don't fall into the category of a problem child when it comes to other countries trading with America. We have a free trade agreement. America has a healthy trade surplus. So there's not really any concept for Trump to get angry at Australia in the same way he gets angry with other countries which have a trade deficit. So that is hugely to Australia's advantage economically, quite apart from the fact that we are the closest military alliance to the United States, really, of almost any country in the world. So there are so many arguments which the government can throw towards Donald Trump to argue for an exemption, but of course that doesn't guarantee anything.
That's why Anthony Albanese is now scrambling to get Trump on the phone. Australia's biggest steelmaker, BlueScope, which makes ColourBond roof and fencing sheets, has a huge steel mill in Ohio and employs about 4,000 people.
In theory, there should be a non-starter for this tariff threat from Trump to Australia because of the security and economic situation between the two countries. But you never know. That's absolutely not a guarantee with Donald Trump Mark II. I mean, just go and ask Canada. I mean, there you have a country as friendly as you could ever be with the United States that's facing 25% tariffs, not just on overall, but also on their steel and aluminium as well. So the friendship factor with Trump in the second term is still a very opaque one. It's very, very hard to get a reading on where America's good friends stand. And that's why it's hard to get a reading on this with Australia, because we are going to come across his radar for the first time in his presidency in a big way with this policy.
Coming up, can Anthony Albanese and his ambassador secure a deal with the ultimate deal maker? It feels like a million years ago, but it was Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull who negotiated Australia an exemption from exactly this tariff last time it was proposed. His ambassador was Joe Hockey, who famously had a kind of golf relationship with Donald Trump. They were kind of buddies. Now Anthony Albanese's ambassador in Washington, D.C. is Kevin Rudd, who has been very prickly about Donald Trump, and it would seem that the feeling is mutual. What do you think this says about Anthony Albanese's choice of Kevin Rudd and his decision to stick with him in the Trump administration?
I think Anthony Albanese's decision to appoint Kevin Rudd was always slightly risky, given Rudd and Albanese's previous criticism of Trump. But then, you know, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, criticised Trump a lot. So did Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. So it's certainly not a disqualifying factor. And at that point in time, to be fair, Trump was not really in the picture for a second term. Look, I think that a lot of this stuff about the personalities, when we talk about Albanese and Rudd and Trump, are overblown. I think that these decisions get made fundamentally on issues, on realities, rather than personalities. Yes, they're not of the same stripe politically as Trump compared to Malcolm Turnbull and Joe Hockey. But I mean, Albanese had a very friendly first phone call with Donald Trump. Rudd has subsequently met with Trump. He's certainly very well connected to a lot of Republicans. So I think personally that these issues of politics and personality are more overblown than they should be, and that really this decision will come down to fairly hard nut decisions about the interest of various countries. And I think Trump will be persuaded that Australia should get an exemption because it's in America's interest as much as Australia's.
Something that's changed since last time Donald Trump was in the White House is the AUKUS treaty between Australia, the United States and the UK, which of course involves building nuclear submarines here in Australia. How much will that play into this, if at all?
Well, this actually increases Australia's leverage in this argument compared to 2018 when, of course, AUKUS didn't exist. And it's quite good timing in one sense, Claire, because we've just had Richard Marles go over, the defence minister, and give several $100 million towards the American nuclear submarine project. Of course, Australia is tipping in US $3 billion to help the US submarine nuclear production in the United States as part of AUKUS. That is a very big selling point for Donald Trump. Now, remember, this is the same president who exempted Australia last time without AUKUS. So I think if you look just at the facts, there is a greater argument for Donald Trump to exempt Australia this time round than there was before. Now, the only rider I would put to this is that Donald Trump is a different president this time round. He loves tariffs even more than he did in his first term. So the question is, how much does he love his tariffs? In theory, Australia should get off, but we just don't know.
Cameron Stewart is the Australian's chief international correspondent. You can read all our analysis of what this means for Australian business and everyone else right now at theaustralian.com.au.